Hey everyone, so happy to be here. Um, I'm going to start it off right away. Our Monday puzzles would bore you. This is a traditional star battle puzzle. You all are probably quite familiar with this construct, whether you call it star battle or kings or queens or two no touch. You fit two stars in every region, every row, every column, and no stars can touch. And our Monday puzzles for the Thinky Games community would be incredibly boring, but that's intentional. So I'm Anastasia. I'm with Inkwell Games. We were founded this year to bring classic pen and paper puzzle games to a wider audience. Um, our long-term vision is to reach kids with playful math experiences, and so to do that, we decided to approach grandparents first. Um, why grandparents? Well, I had a theory that, and if anyone here has young children, that parents and teachers have way too much on their plates. And trying to bring something to kids by saying, oh, here's another thing a parent should do with their kid every day or every week is just like fighting an uphill battle. On the flip side, there are grandparents who are desperate to interact with their grandchildren and to find any way to play together. Um, if you've ever tried to FaceTime with an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old, it's like incredibly boring. So our long-term vision is to create a place for multi-generational play. But to get there, our short-term vision is to build an awesome puzzle platform. Um, and so I sort of talked about why we started with grandparents. There were some sort of other bonuses that came with this that felt a little bit different from like the gaming community. You generally don't go after this older demographic, and yet they have money, they have time, and they're looking for daily habits. The other thing is, I think we tend to think of grandparents as this generation that doesn't know how to use technology and, is fumbling and awkward. And that may be true for maybe like my grandparents, but actually the 60 to 80-year-olds who are retiring today, who are having grandchildren now, actually transition to a career on a screens. They're fairly tech savvy, maybe not digital first or digital natives like our generation of children, but they're very comfortable with technology and they're used to digital habits. They used to go to work all day, every day, log on, sit at their computer. And now we're finding in retirement, like that's what they do. They wake up in the morning, they check their email, they check the news. They're doing this all online. They already have these digital habits. And I think they're being missed in the gaming community because they're not quite as like fun and exciting to build games for. So we centered them as our users, and that also helped us figure out, I come from a startup background, so like trying to understand what the value proposition that we were going to provide this user and what the problem statement was. And what we heard, we did dozens of user interviews and surveys and did some like screen time recording sessions of like how are people spending their time digitally. And what we heard was they're looking for ways to stay active and keep their brains engaged. And so interestingly, like, I'll sort of share an aside. I had this theory that they were looking for healthier screen time alternatives and over or like worried about their screen time habits. And over from that generation, I did not hear that. Um, I heard that from people of my generation, I would say millennial Gen X, saying, like, I'm worried about my parents' screen time habits. I'm worried about my own screen time habits or even my children's. But from that boomer generation, very few of them were like worried about their screen time habits. And I attribute this to what I was talking about. Like, they retired after a career on screens. They used to like be on their computers all day at work. Now they're on their computers all day through their hobbies and stuff. But back to the gaming stuff, we started with this person and this persona of the grandparent who wants to play puzzle games and use it to keep their brains active and engaged. And so that forced that user centered all of our design decisions. And the key thing there was realizing that dedicated puzzlers and thinky gamers, and probably the people in this audience right now, unless anyone sort of joined from our social posts, in which case, hello, Inkwellers. But these dedicated puzzlers aren't our audience. And so, what did we build that was a little different? We'll talk about that. One thing, some games do this, but a lot of games don't. Um, we really wanted to make a welcoming design. So things like soft colors, rounded corners, no jump surprises or jump scares. Everything is very like muted and dialed back. Um, I'll also give a hat tip to Nurikabe World. I think they did a fabulous job, and I know they're speaking later today, so I really like their design as well. Um, our timer is hidden by default, so you don't like get any pressure or anxiety. If you want, you can engage with a timer, you can time yourself, but that's not a default mode. Um, the messaging is very like, this is doable, this is hard, but like you're not dumb. There's a place for you here. We developed tons of onboarding materials that were, and I think we have still more to do, but they were very duplicative. So we have a help center, we have instruction guides, we have a blog that repeats a lot of the same resources, we have YouTube videos, we have tutorials. They all teach the same things that people who have never played these logic puzzles can come in and experience it. And a big thing was we didn't introduce leaderboards. And no like inherent competition into the site. And this came up repeatedly in our user interviews that these users were not looking to play against other people, particularly strangers. They were not looking to like beat folks. They were very much viewing it as like, this is going to be a personal challenge for me. So that was some of like the design decisions we made. We also started with quote unquote known games. So I showed you one of our games. We call it Stars. You all probably are more familiar with it as Star Battle. And we also have a Nurikabe style shading puzzle that's known as Light and Shadow, but we call it Fields. And, you know, a tiny handful of our users are familiar with these games, but the vast majority have never experienced a logic puzzle. And so I think it's really tempting when you go out and say, like, I'm going to make a game to want to make a new game, a new mechanic, a novel sort of way to engage with the game. But actually, when we look at our user base, the vast majority have never experienced like amazing games that are already out there. And so we put our efforts into how do we make them more accessible? How do we make them more friendly, approachable, and how do we onboard people into that? So it's not quite as like sexy or exciting to use an existing game mechanic, but it is really exciting to bring these games to a new audience. So that was one major decision that we made. This one was a little bit of an accident. We were planning to, like many games, put a hint system behind some features. You know, if you'd been struggling for a certain minute, we would pop up the chance to get a hint. And maybe you could get one hint a minute or things like that. And we actually just ran out of time before our beta launch to implement those features. And what we saw when we launched was people were using the hint over and over and over. And I'm watching and I'm pulling out my hair thinking, that's not solving a puzzle if you're just clicking, where do I put the next star? Click, where do I put the next star? And we would see, you know, in a 9x9 board, someone might click a hint 81 times. And so at first I was like, this is terrible. We need to limit this. Like, they're not actually learning, but actually they are learning. And eventually, you know, they start to realize that the hints are actually slowing them down. Or every time they place a star, the hint says, place an X in this cell because it touches the star. And you don't want to have to click hint every single time. So eventually, they actually did start to learn. And so we realized that users were actually using the hint system almost as like an onboarding mechanic more than a puzzle solving mechanic, which is a really different construct to think about hints. And so we actually left our hint system completely open and accessible. Users can access a hint at any time. We haven't built our hint system to be smart enough to solve our hard puzzles, but at the beginning of the week, a hint system can usually solve a puzzle from start to finish. And that can basically help walk a user through exactly how to solve. And we see that they're actually learning as they go. The other really cool thing is that we saw that users sort of inherently created their own achievement system. They would start to tell us, oh, I solved a Wednesday puzzle and only used 3 hints. And so what was really delightful about this is they created that achievement for themselves because their motivation was personal. We didn't have to tell them, like, the way you win at Inkwell is to solve a puzzle without hints. They sort of inherently developed that identity. The other thing we did is sort of leaned into, I'm calling it legacy social media. Like, I can't imagine that there's anyone else in the gaming community or at ThinkyCon who's actually like started a Facebook group as their primary channel in the last year. But we asked our audience, like, where do you want to talk about games? Where do you want to get hints? And overwhelmingly, they told us Facebook groups. And I think it's worth just sort of stepping back and making sure you're listening to your users and listening, like, where are they, and showing up where they are. I think it's really natural for game companies to want to be on Reddit, on Discord, and yet, we had a small thread in the Thinky Games Discord, and we had almost no traffic there. It's picked up a little bit lately, but almost no traffic. And yet we launched a Facebook group, and within less than 3 months, we crossed 400 members, and they're very engaged. And so being a little bit more creative and out of the box about where your users are and going there. I'll admit, like, I hate Facebook as much as the next person. It's not where I'm like excited to spend my time, but I am excited to spend time with our community members and see them solve. So that's been really delightful. So we launched and we put out a lot of ads, and we talked about, how puzzles are good for your brain and stay engaged and stay active. And we have, these lovely stock photos of older folks playing our games, and things were going well. And then we started hearing from folks, oh, I play with my morning coffee every day, or I play as a nightly wind down. And so we actually sort of like, okay, cool, let's put some of those messages in our ads. And what we realized is, like, we were previously constraining ourselves with, I'll go back for a second, with these old ads that focus very much on older folks, images and messages. And our sort of oh duh moment was realizing that in designing for grandparents who we decided were people who haven't been exposed to these logic puzzles, we actually were designing for most people, that most people have not been exposed to the Thinky games that we all know and love. And so then we started introducing some new messaging. Same product, different message, different avatars, different stock photos. And suddenly our user base changed pretty drastically. We thought we were going for boomers, and we started bringing in Gen X, millennial, and even younger. And we realized that they actually wanted a lot of the same things. You're going to sort of see some of our users, our older users are talking about, like, I'm hoping to stave off dementia. It's a new learning exercise. I'm trying to stay engaged. And then our younger users are telling us stuff like, I want a daily wind down. It's better than doom scrolling at 8 a.m. So, like, again, sort of like two different motivations between this group, but what we realize is the product actually serves both of them. So that same like soft design that was aimed to appeal to the boomers also works for burned out younger users who, like, don't want an aggressive game first thing in the morning as they're trying to wake up. No leaderboards, like, they're wanting to compete with themselves, not strangers, and they're wanting to do it in a very like small subset of their day. These known games, like this Star Battle that's very well known, still brand new to a huge audience. The hint system, again, it's a learning tool and then a source of pride. And the Facebook group, this one really surprised me, actually. Millennials, we may say that, like, we're done with Facebook, we're logging off, they're still there. They're right in there with the boomers. And, like, we even pulled the average age today. And I think our average age in our Facebook group, according to their stats, is in the 40-year-old range. So it worked for them too, even though it wasn't designed for them. And so, yeah, whereas like a month after launch, we were like 60% boomers, you can now see that, as of a month or two ago, our largest demographic was actually this 30 to 44-year-old age range. And so my sort of message to the Thinky community is there's a huge audience out there that would love Thinky games, but they just don't know it. And so I say don't be afraid to design for a non-Thinky gamer. And when you're doing that, like, think of a very specific user, designed for them. It forces a lot of constraints and a lot of choices. And in doing so, you might discover a much bigger market. So general theme, design very narrow, but don't market narrow, market broad and see who responds well. So my final sort of ask for you all and call to action is try Inkwell games. But more importantly, share it with the non-gamers in your life. I think it could be a great opportunity if you're really into Thinky games to bring other people in your life into something that you love in a way that feels really accessible. So whether that's parents who are trying to stay active and engaged, friends who have a guilty Candy Crush habit, your partner who wants a morning ritual that isn't social media or whatnot. And for us, that's the real test of whether we built something for everyone and for everyone to see how big this market is. So thank you. And I'll also just share that our Sunday puzzles are actually quite hard. So
I would say the Sunday puzzles are very hard. I was trying them and I was struggling for sure. So there's definitely some interesting, difficult puzzles in there. Thank you for the talk. It was wonderful, and the like it's like something we want to do as well as like bring Thinky games to more people. But video games have a bit of a barrier to them, especially if they're on Steam or something like that. It's like, what is Steam? I have to install another thing and then buy games through that. Whereas like taking the approach to like web games is like seems like a much better way to find a broader audience, especially with
yeah, I guess
older
I didn't even
generations.
mention that, like
Yeah.
centering like that it was going to be a web game first, not a Steam game or not even an app to download, just
Mhm.
like something where you could just open it up in a browser. Like that is much more accessible.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah.
So a quick question here. Oh, also some questions came up in the chat as well. So one of my first questions was going to be, so when you're designing the next games to be adding to it or any new features, are you still thinking about it as grandparents first? Does that like give you like a good approach to design?
Yes and no. Like
Okay.
we definitely still have grandparents as one of our primary personas
Mhm,
because we also still like thinking back to our original mission of ultimately wanting to get in front of kids.
mhm,
We still view them as like a really great avenue and a really great wedge into the home and
mhm.
with kids. But we've now sort of added this additional persona, and this is like this persona of like the millennial wake up of this is what you do with your morning coffee or on your morning commute. And so we make sure sort of like our new games and our design decisions sort of hit both of those now.
Mhm. Okay. So then we got a question from Patrick, who did a talk earlier, which is, what considerations do you have when picking specific logic puzzles to start with and which to implement next? So I know you've thought about this a lot.
I I have
Yeah.
I have well, I'm an engineer by training, so I have like a 18 column weighted decision matrix, and I have different games ranked. So, we think about things like different mechanics, like Star Battle is sort of a placement game versus Fields is a shading game. It's likely we'll introduce a loop style game or a line drawing game at some point. I'd also love to introduce like a shape game too. Although, one of our constraints as well is, how much shared code base can we use? And so like right now, grid games are a lot easier to build. Um, we started with stars because we sort of knew that, Star Battle was fairly popular. And so it reached one audience. And so we thought we could sort of take those learnings and that popularity and that it would be received well. But Fields was a great example of a game that isn't wildly popular and it still has been received well. So there's a little bit of like looking for novelty. We also talk a lot about like low floor games, games where I didn't mention this, but I sort of hinted at it on our Monday games are supposed to be easy and it ramps up in difficulty to like pretty brutally difficult by the weekend. But for Monday through Friday, we'd really like users to be like pretty successful at those games. And so we need games that have like fairly low floors and people can onboard on pretty well, especially if they're brand new to logic games. And yet, we also are looking for games that have really high ceilings that we can push the limits on Sunday of like, how hard can we make this? Would the Thinky community be proud and challenged? So that's another constraint we think about when we're like looking for new games.
Great, thank you. So I've got a question here from Jagriff, which is, after the experience you observed with hints, have you taken another look at the hint system and tried to design something that teaches players general principles?
Ooh.
That sounds complicated.
I mean, I love this idea. And in fact,
Mhm,
like I think our hint system has a lot to be desired too.
mhm,
We haven't really like given it all the love it needs in the last few months. For example, we don't have a hint system for fields yet. Um, We haven't yet. I would love to do that. We've sort of like half solved that with we actually had a user in our Facebook community who wrote a really extensive like PDF guide to like principles around solving
Nice.
stars puzzles. And so we converted that into a blog post. And that right now I think that sort of like static is like serving a placeholder for what that like really dynamic tutorial could be.
Mhm.
But would love it. I would love to do something more engaging and dynamic.
So
The other
what?
fun thing that happens is our Facebook community sort of invents their own terminology
Hmm.
for like the constraints that maybe like the puzzle community has never done, in the way that there's like Sudoku terms, my Facebook community has like totally different terms for what happens in our puzzles, which is funny.
Nice. So when you were talking about the hint system, it reminded me of a talk we had earlier from Vexorian, where it was kind of about like not thinking of like using a hint system or cheating or something like that as a negative thing, but actually just as another solution. Like you could see it as a valid solution to hit the hint button and play it out. And I think that is a really good way of learning as well. I remember when I was much younger, I would play games and I would just look up the solutions and play along with the solutions. And for me, that was very satisfying. And it was just interesting to see the solution play out. So maybe having a hint system that allows people to just see the entire solution is actually beneficial to you. And I guess that was one of your conclusions from that.
Yeah, and the other cool thing too is like we regularly see people play with hints, their first solve, and
Mhm.
then see if they can solve it again
Mhm.
without hints.
Right.
Or, we have users who on Friday will go back and play Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday again, so that they can be like, did I learn the
Right. That's
thing that I
cool.
was like stuck on before? And can I remember it the next day?
Very cool. So then one last question, we'll squeeze this in. So it's another one from Patrick. How do you tune the difficulty of puzzles to suit this general audience? How do you make an easy puzzle that's still interesting? And how do you know exactly how easy to make it?
Great question. I have a sort of cheating answer, which is we work with an amazing team of puzzle designers. And so hat tip to Lunark and their team. I'm sure there are probably some folks on the call who are familiar with them, slash maybe have designed some of our puzzles, but they do a fabulous job of designing the puzzles, spreading the difficulty out, testing it internally, and then returning it. But on the flip side, we're collecting lots of data. And
Mm.
so eventually I have dreams of sort of looking back and seeing like, oh, did we tune the puzzles correctly? We can see that solve times go up Monday through Sunday, but then get faster if people return. And so I think there's some really awesome stuff we could do down the road to be more deliberate about this.
Did you have any fears of, because so Lunark, amazing team, amazing puzzle designers, but they're real deep in that logic puzzle space. Did you have any fears that working with them would mean the puzzles are going to be way too difficult, or did it just work out nicely?
No, it mostly worked out. At first, I was chatting with them and they said, well, what difficulty do you want? And I said, a full spread over the course of the week. And they said, no, I don't think you want that. And so they helped, teach me what the full spread for Inkwell looks like.
Yes, the actual upper end is beyond anything. Okay,
Exactly.
cool. Great. Thank you, Anastasia. We'll leave that there. If there are any other questions, did I make a thread on Discord yet? I can't remember. I'm falling behind. I'll do it in a moment. But if there are any further
I'll see you
questions,
over
please send
there.
them to Discord. Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll move over to the next talk. All right. Thank you.